possibilities of color are wonderful, a study entrancingly interesting and unlimited. Robert Henry. This is The Artful Painter, art lessons for artists, collectors, and people who love art. G. Russell Case is a Western painter inspired by the beauty of creation. Based in Utah, he brings to life the epic landscapes that surround him with a confident voice that's honed with humility and reverence. His carefully contemplated design incorporates unique vantage points that convey a sense of the smallness of man amidst the vastness of the landscape. The geology of deep canyons, ancient mesas, towering mountains, and red rock cliffs serve as the setting for perhaps a Navajo shepherd and his sheep, or a solitary cowboy mounted on his horse. The small and nearly insignificant figures and man-made structures that often appear in Russell's paintings convey a sense of the enormity of the landscape that these inhabit. Outdoor painting is vital to Russell's development as a painter. The play of light and shadow intrigue him. Keen attention to natural color allows Russell to express the beauty of the landscape in his own unique voice. He is not interested in merely a literal interpretation of the landscape. Russell's intent is to create visual poetry that evokes an emotional response within the viewer and draws them deep within the scene. The beauty of G. Russell Case paintings are clearly the result of his pursuit of a higher perspective. My name is Carl Olson, and this is The Artful Painter. Well, Russell, it's great to have you on The Artful Painter. I'm really happy that you agreed to talk with us today. It's nice to have you here.
Thanks. My pleasure, Carl.
So I became familiar with your work back in July of 2017. You were at the Booth Museum with Matt Smith. I think the exhibit was called Painting Red Rock Country, Past and Present, and had some of your artwork there that was just, it was so beautiful, and your unique vision. I like some of the vantage points that you had in there. You had a unique way of selecting high vantage points. And to have them there next to Edgar Payne paintings was amazing. So I want to talk about where that comes from, that unique vision that you have in painting landscapes.
Well, first of all, thanks. Yeah, that was quite an honor to be invited to be in a show at a beautiful museum, and of course, with Matt, one of the leading painters of the country, and then to have the deceased work that we had, like Maynard Dixon and Edgar Payne. Yeah, that was quite an honor. And I think when you talk about unique, I wish I could understand that completely. We're kind of built on a lot of shoulders. We look at things influenced by all those guys, especially Dixon and Payne. The ones that came before us, we're always looking and thinking, and it helps us see things, through our lens, but we're obviously all absorbing things. And I think that's an important process for what we do, is to look at what's come before us. I think we're to reinvent every wheel every time, it'd be pretty tough. And nobody does that. Everybody's influenced in some way.
Yeah, that's true. The English language fails me in particular, so I don't express myself as well as I'd like. But that's a humble admission, and it's so true that everything we do is built on the shoulders of others if we're willing to learn those lessons, and we're not so egotistical that we feel like we've got to make our own brazen mark in the world, which seems to be what modern art is doing these days, is shocking people and trying to seek this elusive thing of being original.
Yeah,
So,
trying to be original, we end up being just a bunch of noise sometimes. We're trying so hard to get away from the conformity of what's come before us, and those principles are just there. They're just like gravity. You don't go fly without understanding gravity and aerodynamics. And so as artists, I think it's, especially two-dimensional artists, I think it's kind of easy to say, I'm expressing myself. If we tried to do that with music, or like you were saying, poetry, the English language, we couldn't get away with it for a minute. But two-dimensional art seems to attract a lot of artists who want to get out of anything that's came before and have everything random. And I think that's what we're kind of up against in some of this is trying to express ourselves with a vocabulary that people understand and say something. And if we lose those boundaries, we end up saying nothing, kind of like the emperor's clothes. Don't get me started on modern art.
what do you think about modern art?
Well, it's hard to define. If we're talking about good shape, good color, good balance, good elements, you can go a long ways, and there's beautiful things and wonderful composers in that. But a lot of times it's like I say, when they fall off the edge. I think Francis Schaeffer had a lot to say about art in our world, and how it comes out of a society and why. And it would be a long conversation, but the short version from my perspective would be kind of what we've talked about. It's when you leave the boundaries and say, I have no boundaries. There is nothing governing what I'm doing. He talks about falling off this edge, this despair, losing, just the idea of losing any communicative power to illustrate what you're doing, to describe things, to talk like we do, and I just think you end up saying nothing. No one understands it. It's open for the interpretation has to come from the viewer. And it can be whatever you want it to be. And like you had mentioned earlier, it's a lot about it. It's just, let's see how we can shock and awe. Let's see what we can do next to get outside the boundaries. Yeah, we'd have to really look at some examples because I hesitate. You start talking about something and somebody has something in mind and they're saying that, they're thinking, is that what he's referring to? But it's kind of a tough subject without visuals. But yeah, maybe enough said.
I get you on that. Yeah, I think there are some things that we can learn from it. I think I mentioned this in a previous episode of this show. I attended a workshop with Clyde Aspivig, or not a workshop, but a lecture that he did, and he showed some examples of modern art. And he wasn't necessarily saying this is good art, but he says we can learn lessons from modern art and use it and use those lessons as we develop as an artist ourselves. He wasn't saying we go out and start painting urinals and put them in an installation, even though he did show that.
Did he?
Yeah, one of his slides. Yeah. So, I don't know. I'm not sold on that one. I like beauty. There's a book, one of Andrew Loomis's last books was called The Eye of the Painter, and that's what he espoused was beauty in painting. That was the boundaries that he established for the art that he felt spoke to his soul. Yeah,
and it can kind of be it's very subjective in some aspects, because what is beauty? Who gets to define it? And I think that would be a good argument, or a good place to stay. But we've kind of left, the postmodernists have taken that and stretched it so far that anything can be described as beautiful. And so I think that's why when I have to get back to where does all this come from? If there's no reason behind it, if there's no way to establish any kind of idea of what beauty is, then my opinion is just my opinion. Your opinion is yours, and truth has really no basis. It's just whatever the person. It starts with the human. And again, that's why I find it interesting to study theology right along with my art, to understand why I'm creating, why I'm making things, where that comes from. And I think it's hard to define without a definer. So when I say something's beautiful, it's just my opinion. And urinals, like Clyde was pointing out, is this an idea of beauty? Well, we can't say no if we don't have an established point of reference. So I think that's why.
Yeah,
I can point back to where I do.
I agree. I mean, then you fall into levels of taste and subjectivity there. What is beautiful to me is not necessarily beautiful to my wife. Being married to her for 42 years, I've learned that. And I can live with that. It's okay, There are some fluctuating boundaries there. So what are the boundaries that you've established for yourself, or parameters, maybe that's a better word, that you use to determine what you like to paint, what you want to paint?
That's a really big question, and I think about it a lot. I think of why am I where I am painting the things I do, and why am I excited by the subjects that I'm excited about? That would be a tough paragraph put down, but I think mostly it's because of my worldview, and I think worldviews have so much to do with everything we do and choose and think. Growing up, my dad he worked for the Bureau of Indian Affairs. He was a painter himself. He got a master's in watercolor at Utah State University here where I live in Utah. And I grew up looking at things in the house that he had traded for from other artists and that he had done. And so I had that sort of in my filter of worldview, and everything. As I moved forward, I just kind of loved to draw. I saw him do this. I drew, and then as I started to look at the world around me, I would see these subjects. One of the biggest moments, I think, of maybe in my young world was when he took me on a trip with him. He would travel to Indian reservations, and they would set up educational programs back when we thought we had, the answers for things. And I went with him. I might have been 8 or 10, and I was seeing some of this, the desert things back before a lot of changes had happened, kind of in its raw state.
What part of the desert was this, or where were the reservations that you went on?
Mostly the Navajo. We were all through the Navajo, Four Corners, out on the mesas, the Hopi. And, I can remember pulling into some of these places and just, I didn't even know, it looked like a, different world to me. That was kind of engraved in my memory, I think. And then jump forward years, I was painting in a show in Scottsdale, Arizona, and met a man. This was after college, and I met a man who introduced me to Maynard Dixon and his work. And I've never even seen it. I didn't know anything about Maynard Dixon. And I remember he brought a book in and laid it down where I was working and just says, "Hey, you might want to look at this." And I started looking through that, and how I was seeing, I was seeing things from my past, these places that I'd traveled with my dad, that I'd driven through, and I was like, holy cow. And it just really opened doors, and I was seeing somebody who was, composing and capturing strong imagery, mood thing, Maynard Dixon. I think he's one of the most important I think he's our Western Hopper.
Yes. I've not heard that, but that is perfect. I'm going to have to steal that from you. But that is so true, because I've seen his paintings here in Georgia, which is strange because here we are in the South, but the Booth Museum has his work, and it's just extraordinary. Or had his work there, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just the simplicity of his designs, but yet the power. When I started looking at it, the way they were made, his smaller work on site, the 16 by 20s, 12/16s, if you look at them, they're just masterfully done. They're one and out. They're stroked in. It wasn't about a application. It wasn't technique at all. It was just approaching these designs, but yet the subject was important. The big mesas and the Indian people that he painted, and just the way he composed things and what he was thinking about. I mean, a lot of his worldview, comes out in, some of his big paintings. Cloud World, I think, of What an Indian Knows. Anyway, it was just very impactful to me, and on my career and my growth, my kind of walk through my art, and trying to figure out what I was wanting to say, where it was coming from. And so he had a big influence on me. And then, of course, I had already been influenced by the Ashcan school and Henry.
That's interesting. So what attracted you to the Ashcan school?
I think the realness of it, the realism that they were, the realist painters, that they were painting real life, opposed to
like everyday things.
Yeah, just looking out a window. I think Bellows would talk about, and painting what you saw. And of course, in that time period, there was a lot of struggle, a lot of depression, and things. They were recording it all, and I just liked. I kind of liked that, but I really liked the power of their paintings, how they were putting them together. When you see some of Bellows' paintings and the masculine stroke, the palette that they're using, so all that carries over, of course, into like somebody like the one who really kind of rose out of that, being Edward Hopper, and the emotion that he carried through. Is to me, a very interesting painter and a very interesting worldview. I'd love if somebody says you can sit down and have a conversation with somebody for 2 hours from the past. Who would it be? I'd love to.
I agree.
Brain.
I've got a huge volume I picked up for $1. It weighs 20 pounds. But I love it because it has these huge reproductions of his paintings, because realistically, that's the closest I'm going to get to most of these paintings in my lifetime. And so having that, and they look to be good reproductions, but he was a storyteller with those paintings.
And he had such a unique way of looking at the human being, what was going on, the struggle, the things that he had of men and women sitting there in these places of kind of a dissidence or a separation, wondering. That's why I'd love to know his thought process, what he's looking at there.
Well, that's what it seems like. He's not caught the moment of action. The action has either already happened or is about to happen, and there's that moment of that person is in some kind of thought, and you're wondering, what are they thinking?
Yeah.
At that point, or what are they getting ready to say if there is a companion next to them? It's like they're formulating their words.
Yeah, and why is he drawn to that? What was he trying to get at? I'd really like to know more about them, the artist and the man behind it.
It's interesting to hear that you were influenced by your father in a very positive way. He was a watercolorist, so that I don't want to assume anything, but I assume that you started in watercolor as well. Is that?
I did.
Yeah.
For quite a number of years, I painted just watercolor.
And how did that transition happen from watercolor to oil painting? And what lessons did you take from watercolor into your oil painting that you're doing today?
Well, I think on just a mere technical aspect, you take a lot of, watercolor, I think, lends itself or has a lot more kind of preliminary thinking. Your whites are your paper, so you save those. So everything has to be a little more planned, drawn. That's how I looked at it anyway. It was more of an application process, to build washes and create, and then work towards your darks. So approaching a subject for me was the drawing had to be well planned out. And so as I moved, and actually the time was exactly the same. I told you that I met Maynard Dixon, that I started painting in oils. I was actually at a show where we were just, on site painting every day for 2 months. And when I got home, I was kind of burnt out in the process of just glazing and building, and I was kind of like, I'd been watching some of the guys around me with oil, and it looked just so spontaneous and fun, more spontaneous, where you could go in with an idea and start moving things around. You didn't have to be so worried about first of the painting, because you're going to come back and you paint over things.
So the very direct and alla prima approach to.
Yeah, exactly. It looked so kind of fun to me. And I got home and I was like, well, I'm gonna, since I'm kind of burned out on the watercolor, I'm gonna just mess around with this and try it. And it was so fun that I just kind of started doing it. And then pretty soon I wasn't going back to the watercolor at all. I just kind of transitioned into it, and you could work bigger, a little easier. And so, it was just kind of, I always thought I would paint with watercolors. I've really gotten away from it almost 100% now.
So no going back.
Well,
do you ever dabble in it occasionally, just for the experience of it?
I did for a while, but the process to me is just backwards. You usually start with your lights and move to dark and watercolor, and with oil, I'm working dark to light. And so to go back and do watercolor, it's just like backwards. And I'm like, what? It's kind of, I probably ought to. It would make me draw more, better.
Watercolor is I think it's a very beautiful medium, but it's not something that I have any skill with. I've dabbled with it. I'd rather just focus in on oil painting because I'm still just learning that right now. When I saw your paintings at the booth, so one of the things that impressed me was your mastery of color. The colors are somewhat more muted and harmonized. If anything, I don't know, they draw you in. There's a sense of atmosphere with the color.
Thanks. It's hard to see your own work. So I'm always interested in feedback like that, because I'm always wondering what I'm seeing, and what they're seeing. And I always, of course, we're our own worst critic at times. I'm always struggling with that. I'm interested in color as far as, I think the biggest aspect of it is I want a natural color. I've been actually in the last year or two messing around with some palettes, limited palettes, where you can get a better harmonizing, and it's fun because it gets me out of my comforts, my usual colors, but still, I think in everything said, I like to look out. I want a painting, especially things that I do on location. I want it to come back and feel like the place I was at. I want to, the temperatures, the mood, the sensitivity of things that were going on. So yeah, I'm drawing from what, from that creation, from that beauty, from the things that are there. And I want to interpret that into, but I want to keep that natural feel of of color in the outside and what I'm seeing.
You mentioned using your traditional palette that you've established over the years versus experimenting with a limited palette. Can you expound on that a little bit? What are you doing in that area?
What we're doing is simplifying it down to colors that complement each other in a way, and they're not just the basic, primary colors, secondary, tertiary. So it's called a 3-4-5 complement, and actually Skip Whitcomb turned me onto it.
That's the first name that popped up in my mind when you said that.
Right. And the more I play with it, it's like, okay, so the colors I've been experimenting with, so on the last couple paintings, are yellow, green, orange, and blue violet, or red violet. And what it does is it takes me away from my go-tos, blues, like my cobalt, my ultramarine. So now my blue is a red violet, let's say. My warm, instead of yellow, is a yellow green, and my red is my orange. So as I mix these colors and these grays and things, it's forcing me to come up with different roadways to get to the values and the temperatures that I want with these limited colors. Of course, you got white. You have white in there, but it's really fun and interesting to see how you can push these colors that you're looking at a natural painting, or outside, or photograph of outside, and instead of a blue sky, what are you going to use? Blue violet with white, maybe a touch of the yellow green. And it's neat to see how at first you're really feels like you're playing tennis with your wrong hand. This gets done, you're seeing this harmonizing of color. You're like, wow, it's more important to have a good harmony than it is to just always have it, look exactly like what you're looking at sometimes. So that's kind of opened the doors to how you can get more expressive with it through color, and it kind of helps in a way. You're not pulling all these other colors in when you don't need them.
Well, artists use that phrase, it's harmonized color. I come from a filmmaking background, and in video in particular, and there's an analogy with it I see in filmmaking and artists experimenting with their limited palettes. We have this thing called a lookup table, which says, take this color, push it this way, take that color, push it that way. Most people will probably never acknowledge it, but when you go see a cinematic film, you will, there is a tint, like there's the orange, teal versus blue, look, and your mind adjusts to it, but there is a particular look to it. And I think it's exciting to see artists in a way experimenting with that, going away from ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson, cadmium yellow, lemon, and experimenting with these different color lookup tables, if you will. That's probably a really bad analogy, but that's how I learned.
Yeah, that's exactly what we're. Tim Lawson's another one who really understands how to get this done. He uses color charts, and man, that guy's him and Carlson. Very good at this simplifying color and harmony, and it's really fun stuff to play with. Someone like I think of Len Schmiel. Len needs no charts. Len needs no. He just has it. He's almost memorized all this stuff, and he can just do it instinctively. He's a great example of all this kind of mushed into one brain. What a thinker he is.
Indeed. I really respect his work tremendously. Yeah. Just an outstanding artist. Yeah. So, but that is something I just noticed when I looked at your work firsthand is your use of color. I admit, as a beginner, I still struggle with this idea of the eye candy, the super saturated colors, and toning that back has been a real it has been a challenge. It's a real challenge. Even though I know academically what's going on up here, you still want to push the volume control up to 11 sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we love color and we see it and we want to express it. It's like one time Lawson told me, Tim Lawson says, I can't remember how we got on the subject, but he said something about color. He says, you want to talk about color, then paint a lot of grays, in the painting, and then have limited color. And then you'll say more about color than you will if everything's about color. I mean, it's a simple idea, but it's really something that to think about. There's just so many little, aspects of what we do like that we pick up from our peers. It's so important, I think, to have times where you come together like that to paint, talk to each other. One of the greatest times we had was the Maynard Dixon show when it was down in southern Utah. Mount Carmel, down at Maynard Dixon's old property, his last studio that he built down there. The Binghams, Paul Bingham, bought the property and created the show. And it was amazing how we could get the artists love to come, and we would gather and paint on location for the week, and just hang out and share meals and talk into the night. And I mean, there was all these guys, Tim Blosson and Dan Pinkham, Len Schmill, Kip Whitcomb, Matt Smith, and they would all come. Clyde was down there one year. I remember it was so nice to be able to bounce these and listen. I was mostly just a bystander listening to all these masters talk about what they were working with. But what a pleasure to bounce and to hear things like that,
I sometimes think that's the best way to learn, in a way. It's one of the reasons I do this show. Is it's a conversation, and sometimes I wish there was another person doing the talking besides me, and then I could just listen. But there is something about a conversation that reveals much about the thinking behind a process, and that's what I've enjoyed about talking to different people. I really, at my level, I had no business talking to, I suppose, but it's been a real blessing to me to be able to do that, to get to know some of their thought processes with it, and it's helped me in that learning.
Yeah, I bet.
So one thing that is a common thread with many people that I've heard and talked to is there's this dichotomy, okay? So we're in a school of realism, if you want to call it that. We tend toward paintings that can be recognized and interpreted by our brains as being a landscape, figure, but yet we seek to express that through abstraction. So many, you get close to a painting and you see that abstraction and you pull back and you see the interpretation or interpolation that your brain does. I'm fascinated by why we are drawn as artists to that.
The whole thing is an abstraction, right? We're working on a two-dimensional surface. So the whole thing, sometimes they'll say, the whole thing's a lie anyway. We're dealing with atmosphere, concepts, and linear perspective. We're trying to create three-dimension on a two-dimensional space. So it's kind of a thing you scratch your head out some days and you think, what is it I'm doing? Why do we do this? That's why I have to get back to a root of this sense of why I want to create. Why do I want to look at things and see the beauty in them, see the interesting? and then communicate that. Why do I want to express myself? And I think it comes down to the, what we're made, how we've been created, how we've been wired. I mean, to go to the obvious, we're created in the image of God, and
exactly,
and these attributes, and we're looking. The way I look at it is when I go outside, where it all starts, where it's all in front of me. I'm looking at this, and I realize that I'm playing out of my field. I'm like, I can't even do this justice in a sense of how do I bring this into a painting? And again, we get back to the idea of, the big conversation of the modernists, the realists. I need to have some kind of application process, some rules to go by. And I think when we look at the elements of art, and we all start at the correct or a correct assumption of what we're doing. I think this is where so much confusion comes in when you throw out the moralistic process of what is beauty, right?
It becomes amoral. There's no boundaries.
Right.
Yeah,
that's right. There's no boundaries. There's nothing, and as Schaefer says, you fall beyond the point of this depressed state that you lose everything. You think you're saying everything, and you're saying nothing. You think you're going to get somewhere. He uses some of the artists, from the past and their tragic lives to show this idea of trying to chase something, trying to make an ultimate out of something that was never meant to be an ultimate. It's trying to point us towards something bigger than ourselves, than the art. And I think that's the way I have to approach it, is understand that there's purpose behind this, but it's not within itself, or it doesn't originate with me. I get to participate in this as a maker, as a creator, as a thinker, but I've got those attributes from somewhere else. Yeah, it's a deep subject, but I love to talk about it. I just wonder how far you want to take it.
Well, yeah, I think some of the things that we're thinking about when you said that is, I look at a sunset. Or it doesn't have to be a sunset. It could be a majestic mountain range. Or it could just be a marsh, cattails, or just grass, clover, anything. And I can try to do an impression of that on canvas or a board, but it will never match what the grand creator has done. He makes it grow, right?
Yeah.
And so I think about this, and I think, well, what am I trying to do here? Well, I'm not trying to outdo the creator. I'm trying to bring honor.
That's right.
To the creator. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Oh, yeah. That's what.
Yeah, it's just an expression
of
appreciation.
I'm trying to say without saying thank you, Carl.
Okay, I gave you the door.
So if it's it comes down to what is the chief end of man, and like I agree with the statement that it's to glorify God and enjoy Him forever. And
yeah.
If I turn that around, if it's all about my happiness, my glory, my end, I think that's where Schaefer helps us walk down when we take that to its conclusion, we end up with nothing, because we were made to receive from Him. We need Him. He doesn't need us, in a sense. Yeah. And so if I get that out of whack, it's gonna, I don't know, I'm always looking for meaning. I think when artists get together and the philosophers talk and the art critics, it's always like, what is art, right? What is this kind of about, is what they're saying, and they're looking for meaning, but a lot of times without a theistic approach, where they're going to end. They're going to end with the human being. Everything's going to come within us, and if we don't have that answer, and like you said, we're looking at a creation that's been created like a tree. We can't grow a tree without a seed, without dirt, without water, without light. All we're doing is taking elements and putting them together, just like an artist is. I'm in there using paint, pigments, brushes, tools, things that that have all come from somewhere. We didn't create them, but we're bringing them together. And even the art, even the music, even the words, everything that's being borrowed. And it's being used for one reason or another. I'm communicating for a reason. And I think I don't know, I think I probably keep repeating myself, but this idea of if we don't understand the idea of what we're glorifying and who we're glorifying, it's going to be a self-glorification, which...
And see, that's why I have a problem with the word masterpiece. I mean, we seek... Well, I shouldn't say we, I'm assuming it, but it is one of the tropes out there is the artist is always seeking to create that one masterpiece that's going to speak. And the problem with the masterpiece is it's bringing honor to the artist.
That's right.
And so to me, it's a futile thing to always be seeking a masterpiece. Just express, do the best that you can. Subsequent works will become better, hopefully. Some may not. That's okay. It's part of the process. But to me, seeking this idea of creating this masterpiece, it's not going to happen for me.
Well, and how do we know when I was just at a high school talking about, art and talking basic things. And somebody is asking questions, and this gal says, well, what's your favorite painting you've ever painted? Like, what was your masterpiece? And I was just like, as we do this, I think we get a masterpiece or a painting we think is maybe a little better than the others, and something is really close to what we were shooting for. But by 3 days or a week or a month, that's taken backseat to whatever else we're moving for. It's more of a process and a journey moving through this, like you were talking about. And then even the idea of what we're talking about gets so self-inflated, right? I want to say sometimes, what if this was just a means to provide for my family? To provide a living for me and maybe for other people. Why does it always have to be this? I think the purists look at art and say, well, it can never be for anything other than art itself. I'm reading a book right now that's kind of, I think, turning the whole craft into an idol. Like, they're so worried about what they're going to say about me in the art history books, if they are, and leaving this so-called legacy at the expense of everybody around me. And when I read some of the biographies of the artists that have come before us, it looks like they left a wake of disaster at the expense of holding up this idol, is what I would call it. This, if I can get there, if I can just do this, and it's all self-motivated. It's all about the ego, and and I think there's something to say about the craft and about art itself, but yet on the other hand, we do need to eat. We do need shelter, and so if it's something that's trying to separate itself from that, I think is kind of depleted. I hear a lot of younger painters coming out of college and things, and they'll ask for advice. How do I survive as an artist now? And a lot of them, of course, are coming out of the secular mindset of the postmodernists, saying, whatever you do, if you sell your painting, you're lessening the art. You're
That's
selling.
Incredible. I don't understand that.
Yeah,
I just don't understand that.
And a lot of them, Carl, they'll have 3 or 4 kids. They'll have a family. They've made decisions in their life, and now they're saying, well, but this is my dream. This is what I'm supposed to do. I just know it. I'm like, well, how are you going to pay the bills? How are you going to survive? You're actually, your life, it's going to end up in shatter, maybe. I don't know. There's a lot that could be said, but that's my opinion. That if it's too one-dimensional, then maybe we ought to look at what our big purpose is. Of course, now we're back to worldview and where that comes from.
Yeah. Well, there's seems to be an intellectualization. See, I can't even say the word. I mean, I saw a book the other day. I didn't buy it, but it was called Art Theory. How can art be? My old simple mind, I can't think of how can you have a theory of art? Somebody's going to write in and say, Carl, you big dummy. You need more education. I don't know. But sometimes we just kind of overthink things a little bit. And it's okay to just like it because it's great, you know?
At the end of the day, sometimes that's what I mean. I juggle all this thought and reason. And why am I doing what I'm doing? Have I got my own voice in every little movement? And then pretty soon I'm just like, oh, my word. I want to go out. It's like Hopper said one time, they were asking about some of this. And he says, just the light that falls on the side of a building is so beautiful at times. Can I just go out and find something that's interesting and that I think is beautiful and paint, But then again, you're using concepts that I'm using design, drawing and color and form and all these things. So yeah, it's an interesting thing. It makes you, it's always, you're always thinking about it. And sometimes you just have to, like I think you're saying, set down the thinking and just work. And then just take a look and see what it's doing, where you're going, what other people, get feedback in it.
Sometimes I think, what would I write for my artist statement? I paint.
They're always into it. They're always asking me, okay, well, give us an artist statement. Give us a statement about this work. And it's like, I don't know. We're using something that's visual, and you want me to put it down, in words. It's kind of hard to translate at times.
Yeah, it's like there's got to be this big essay of thought that went into it. It's true, we do think, and there is some thought that goes into it. I'm not trying to minimize what artists do, but I do feel like sometimes we overthink things. I'll get a book. I bought this book on color 2 or 3 years ago, got it real cheap, and it's going through, and it was interesting. But man, they would use these modern art examples and write this big, long paragraph on why this piece of art was so important. And I had to use a dictionary to read the explanation.
That's right.
No.
Yeah, something wrong. Yeah.
Oh, man. Well, one thing I think, and that I sense in our conversation too, is observation is an important part of what artists do, learning how to see. And you have painted from outdoors. That's a big part of your painting experience and the and observing. So what are some of the lessons that you've learned about the value of painting outdoors?
As landscape painters, why would we go anywhere else? We need to get in front of the reality of what we're looking at. If you're going to be an animal, you're going to be a wildlife artist, you're going to be a horse painter, you're going to specialize in something specific. You get in front of it and you paint from life. And that's one of the most important things that I was told early on. The artist, Bill Anton, I remember we were in Prescott, Arizona, and I just started painting in oils, and I was just kind of picking his brain. And he says, you want to be a landscape painter? Then go outside and paint. And I was like, well, that's the no-nonsense kind of instruction I need. So I started painting outside and realized right away how important that was to look at things and get a blueprint in your head of what's going on there. And this brings me right back to the idea that there's actual principles and laws taking place, like in atmospheric perspective. Distance carries, depending on the particles in the air and the atmosphere that you're looking through and how it glazes things and brings things to life. So there's so much to learn on location. And if you're not doing that, if you're in the studio painting from photographs is the other option, right? If you're painting landscapes, you're in the painting from photographs. The camera's limited us and itself in what it can bring to you. It's, for instance, in shadows, you can't see all the reflected light and color that's in shadow on a camera usually. A lot of times it's going to be a black or a dark shape. So if you're outside painting enough, you can transport that into your paintings from photographs. I mean, I'll tell you one of the examples that just kind of blew my mind. I was in Matt Smith's place, studio, and this is after computers, this is after the technical age, and he can still paint from a 5x7 photograph or 3x5 photograph. These old little ruffled up photographs, and these incredible paintings, when they get done, they look like he'd been standing on location. Well, he's painted so much on location that he knows what that photograph is not telling him, and he's putting it in the painting. It's amazing.
This is so true, because Russell, when you were at the booth, you were there with Matt, and the reason I was there was because I took a workshop from Matt. Wished I'd taken a workshop from you too, but he had all these little old photos, and he just created this amazing painting, and I'm saying, what am I doing here? But it had to be, and he even, it's years of experience being outdoors and having that memory so that he can interpret what that photo has in it.
Exactly. Yeah. Then he can use those as reference. But if that's your starting point, and your starting point is not in front of those places, painting for years like that and looking and studying, that's the problem you're going to run into. Is you're going to be photograph painters, and they're pretty easy to see. And so as a landscape painter, being on site, on location, is so important to do, I think.
What are the giveaways when you see a painting? You say, that was done by a photo.
A lot of the highlight and shadow, I think. A lot of the highlights will be almost pasty white.
Yeah.
And then the shadows will be, black holes sort of. That I would just say that's one of the first things you see. And
so the dynamic range mimics what was in the camera.
Very low dynamic range. Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing I see is perspective.
And perspective. Yeah. The drawing a lot of times is a giveaway. But then
the buildings will be leaning, there's this distortion of the lens, if you're going to paint from a photo, at least straighten out the lines, right? Vertical lines.
Especially when you're dealing with figures or things like that, a horse or something, they'll foreshorten or miss the foreshortening of what the camera does. So it's just, you just need to get out and paint from life. It's one of the.
Yeah, I'm kind of bummed right now, though, because it's hard for me to get out with this crazy pandemic.
Oh, yeah.
But I won't be home for a year or two after this thing. So my wife and I are hitting the road.
It's funny because where I am, everybody's out.
Yeah, but see, you're spread out. But here where I live, it's heavily populated, and then you got crazy people and things like. It's just hard. It's hard, and we're a hot spot for the disease.
But we were out painting this summer, me and a couple friends, and we thought, well, let's go up towards Jackson Hole. Well, my word, everybody's got a trailer and a camper, and every campground was full, and I was like, holy cow, everybody's everywhere. Outside, out in the country.
Oh, well. The other thing that I enjoyed about your paintings, I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, but your paintings they look huge, even though they're small. not small, but they're not these gigantic canvases, but yet they still have this immensity to it. And it was a delight to go and look at your paintings, and you see this little figure, a shepherd with a sheep, or a cowboy on a horse.
Well, yeah, and that's always been an aspect that I like to convey is how big things were out there.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when you go to Canyon de Chelly and Monument Valley and some of these places, these big canyons, it's just overwhelming. I think it's one of the things that draws me a lot. And you know, it's not an original thought by any means. They've been doing this for quite a while, but I just really like it. I really enjoy communicating the vastness, the bigness of our world out there, especially when you get out on the desert or some of those canyon places, right?
Do you have other subjects that you're interested in painting that you haven't explored yet? Is there something that you're looking forward to exploring in the future?
I am. I'm always thinking, you know, when I see things, ideas and paintings that I really like, I think, man, I really want to move into this direction. And I do at times. But then I kind of just come back around to the big shapes of the desert, you know, a lot. I really love a lot of the American painters and the rural places. I like the mood, the settings. I love the villages they painted. Just the human aspect against the everyday outside areas, you know, around us. And I think that's really, and I paint that a lot around where I am in northern Utah, and even maybe explore more in the winter. I don't paint a lot of snow, but just to do some real like high key minimalist paintings. I've been kind of formulating these thoughts in my mind, but we'll see. There's so much, you know, when you look at other artists and other paintings, there's just so many possibilities, endless buffet of choices, you know, to ideas to pick up and run with. But yeah, there's things that I don't really have anything specific, you know, that this is what I'm going to do, but just to explore more and more, just more simple, more probably the simplified palette, more how that be used to harmonize color and communicate better, easier, you know, less is more idea, I guess.
Well, that's what I love about learning how to paint. You never stop learning and experimenting. And this universe that we live in is so incredible, so amazing. This planet that we're on, even though man is not taking good care of it, is still an extraordinarily beautiful place. We'll never run out of things to paint, that's for sure.
Right, correct.
I encourage everyone to go check out Russell's website. I'll include a link in the show notes, and you'll see it right here on the screen as well. Russell, what a delight it has been to get to talk with you and to reconnect with you after all these years of first meeting you at the Booth Museum. It's been a pleasure.
Well, thank you. It's an honor, and I hope it's been interesting.
No doubt about that.
Well, thank you.
It was truly good to be able to talk one-on-one with Russell. As I mentioned at the beginning of the show, when I was talking to him, I met him briefly at the Booth Museum back in July of 2017 prior to attending a workshop with Matt Smith. And that was such a privilege to be able to see his paintings in real life. That's something I don't get to do very often. Some of the people I talk to on the podcast, as much as I admire their artwork just from seeing photos of their art, there's nothing like seeing it in person. And so I'm glad I had the opportunity to see several of his paintings face to face. So anyway, I've been intending to have him on the show for quite some time, and I'm glad we were able to finally get together and do this interview. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. It's been a while since I released a new episode of this show, so it's good to be back in the saddle, as it were. I've received some feedback since the last episode. I want to share this with you. The first comes from Niall Jefferson. And by the way, he's in Newcastle, Australia. I have several listeners in Australia, and they've done much to support this show and to spread the word. So I am very grateful to my audience there in Australia. But he has this to say. He says, "My name is Niall Jefferson. I live in Newcastle, Australia. I feel like a broken record as I've heard others who write to you describe a newfound or rediscovered love of painting and an opportunity to get back into it. I thoroughly enjoyed the podcast. I have my own podcast and am familiar with the amount of work that goes into it, from editing and post-production to making it available and finding the time to even just do the podcast." You know, I think this is the first time I've gotten an email from a fellow podcaster. So very nice. But he says, "You no doubt have a large audience now. Congratulations on the good work that you do. I have also found the show notes helpful and have made some purchases through your affiliate links. I'm painting more and more, and the thrill of seeing the occasional good moment is encouraging. Also, having my eyes open to the natural world and seeing things in terms of values and cool and warm colors is exhilarating, although my family is not as impressed." Man, I feel you on that one, okay? Anyway, he continues, "I encourage you to continue the good work that you do, as it is inspiring to those of us who are also in the learning phase. I hope you're keeping safe and well in Georgia. If you happen to come out to Australia, you would be a very welcome guest." And I also want to mention that he made a very generous donation to the podcast, which I very much appreciate. And I'll go over that in just a few minutes when I get to my associate producers for 2021. So anyway, thank you, Niall. I really appreciate that. All right, the next feedback comes from Jennifer. She says, "Dear Carl, thank you so much for your podcast. I stumbled upon them when I was painting in my studio the other day, and I am currently burning through them. You are literally interviewing my favorite contemporary artist. One extra special thing that I appreciate is how you and a couple of the guests you've interviewed gracefully share your faith. In the current world climate, being an artist and a person of faith can feel like a dichotomy. I am currently a high school art teacher, and my husband and I are raising a young family, so my time to paint is precious. Having your podcast makes it that much more exciting to sneak away into the studio for an hour or two. Keep up the phenomenal work you do. I will be looking for you on Instagram, and I would like to make a small donation. I wish it could be more, but maybe when I sell some more artwork to encourage you. Thank you so much. Sincerely, Jennifer Hatzler." Jennifer, look, I deeply appreciate what you did, and I don't want anyone to ever feel bad about the amount that they donate to this show. It's not a requirement to listen to this show. I don't expect it. It is an opportunity that helps me for those that are able to do it. So whatever you do, that's okay. I appreciate it. Believe me, what you did makes a difference. And I really identified with you talking about being a high school art teacher. I've got a video I want to do. It's been in the back of my mind. I had a middle school art teacher that desperately tried to instill the love of art in me. And she wasn't successful at that time, but the latent seed for the appreciation of art was planted by her. Her name was Michelle Pfeiffer. And I have a deep regard for her now. She tried everything she could to make art exciting for us. And I remember, I think it was back in 2017, my wife and I went to Vienna, Austria, and I went to the Albertine Museum. And there were many of the paintings of the art by artists that she talked about. There was Paul Klee, Pablo Picasso, Monet, Manet, Pizarro, and when I walked through that museum, all I could think of was my art teacher back in middle school, Michelle Pfeiffer, Miss Pfeiffer, as we called her then. So I appreciate what teachers do. And in my family, my mother is a retired teacher. My oldest sister is also a retired high school teacher. So I have a high regard for the profession of our educators. They are underpaid, overworked, and they do it as a labor of love, something I can identify with in doing this podcast. So Jennifer, rest assured, I deeply appreciate what you contributed to the show, and I especially appreciate your encouraging and uplifting email. Thank you for that. And finally, this one comes from Lisa Turner. She's referencing the Dan McCall episode. She says, I am new to podcasts mostly because I can't find anything interesting, educating, and soothing until now. I love the podcast with Dan and learning about him as an artist and his way of thinking and feeling, projecting that onto the canvas. I can relate to him well. I do plan to tune into more Artful Painter podcasts as you are doing a quality job. Best of luck with your future productions, Lisa Turner. Lisa, thank you very much for your kind words. I, too, found Dan McCall a joy to speak with and inspiring, and I've gotten a lot of feedback on his episode in particular. I'll never forget painting purple trees, right? So anyway, thank you for that. I always enjoy getting email from listeners to this show. If you have a question, a comment, or even a story to share about yourself, I love reading them. I can't guarantee that I will read everyone emails on the show because I get so many, but I do appreciate the encouragement. It really helps me to keep continuing doing this show, The Artful Painter. So you can go to carlolson.tv and click on the contact tab, and there's a form you can fill out, and that email will get to me. Okay. So one final thing, I just want to acknowledge my associate producers. These are people who financially support The Artful Painter with their generous donations, and we've already heard from two that just recently signed up. Now, the list has gotten so long I can't read everyone's name, so I'm going to have to stop doing that because it's just too many. But it's not that I don't appreciate what you do. But what I will do is take a moment to acknowledge new or recurring donations. So as I mentioned before, Niall Jefferson from Australia, also Stuart Godfrey contributed to the show. Jennifer Hartzler. Jennifer, I read your email, but here I am. I'm just completely messing up your name. I apologize. Okay, and also John, or as he prefers to be called, Jack Calabrese, Michelle Jung, who is a fantastic artist, and she's been on the show before in a previous episode. So, Michelle, I really appreciate your support of the show, and I really enjoy watching your progress as a painter too. She's been doing these huge florals that are just incredible. It reminds me, I don't want to say her work is like Georgia O'Keeffe, but we always do this relationship thing, right? So it called to mind what Georgia O'Keeffe was doing in Taos, New Mexico. But anyway, Michelle, she's got her own unique vision with that. But I digress. Michelle, thank you for your contribution there. Also, Deborah Mueller is a returning donor to the Artful Painter, and her progress has just been outstanding. I just recently saw that she completed the 31-day Strata Easel Challenge, and the quality of her work throughout that challenge was really impressive. I admire anybody that can do the 31-day challenge. The last time I did it, I came down with the flu, and it was brutal. So I haven't tried it since. Maybe I should, but I don't know. I don't think I will. And also Cheryl Petty, she is also a returning contributor to the show. So I thank these new donors, these recurring donors, as well as all the ones in the past. Everything that you've done has made a difference. If you'd like to be a contributor to the show, to become an associate producer, as I like to call you, go to carlolson.tv and click on the Donate tab. Okay. You can also type in theartfulpainter.com. Either URL goes to the same place. So anyway, a big thank you to all of you that have supported this show financially. So that's it for this episode. I'm very grateful that you have hung around this long listening to this episode here. Again, be sure to check out Russell Case's website. You'll You'll really appreciate his art. It's quite beautiful. And if you're watching the video version of this podcast, of course, you will have already seen much of his artwork. Before I close out this show, I just want to share a little bit of cowboy wisdom that I found the other day. It goes like this: no matter how you feel, get up, look up, show up, never give up. So get out there and paint. I'll see you all in the next edition of The Artful Painter.
Picture on the TV.